Hello, all. This is David from D-Swank, and joining me is...
Name's John. I am the Fuzzy Gamer.
And we're doing our hopefully soon-to-be properly named podcast on world building. We've been planning to do this for some time. Originally, I had looked at using the name Magrathea from Hitchhiker's Guide, the place where they build planets, as kind of the name for the podcast, but there's quite a bit of people online that use that name as well. So if during this time y'all come up with a name you think might be suitable, go ahead, leave it in the comments below. So, like I said, we're going to be looking at world building. I'm going to be looking at it from the perspective of an author. I do a lot of writing. I've written several unpublished stories with different world building elements. But how are you going to be coming at this, Fuzz?
Well, because it's currently my shtick in the world at the moment, I will be coming from it from a DM's perspective.
Okay.
Dungeon Master or Game Master.
So, there's a lot of different views on putting together world building and building a history and having it cohesive. And we're going to be dividing up the podcast on themes along those lines each episode. We'll let you know what the next episode is going to be as we progress so that you can have some questions to ask us at the end of the each episode. We're planning on having a question time. But, I said I've done a lot of writing and things like that. I've taken a lot of creative writing courses, and of course I'm a big consumer of media, fantasy, sci-fi, things like that. I've done some DMing as well. But, Fuzz, what sort of background do you have with doing world building with DM, game mastering?
Very, very little. My history in DMing is roughly a year's worth of a single real campaign. But in the past, mostly in school, I've done a little bit of creative writing here and there. I've spent a lot of time pondering alternate histories and worlds and stuff like that. So not nearly as extensive, but yeah.
Okay. Some of the things that we're planning on doing is reaching out, and we'd like to reach out to other people that we know have done world building, other podcasts, people like that as guests eventually. Don't know how well that's going to iron out, but hopefully we get a few. Our other thing, why it was Fuzz and I that got together to do this, is we both have a very similar grounding in pop culture and the media that we've consumed. Babylon 5. We're both children of the 80s. So the classic cheesy Saturday morning cartoons and the not so cheesy, the real Ghostbusters is a great example. That had a fantastic world building for a Saturday morning cartoon. But then there's also we both have some elements that make us more, shows that we've watched that the other person hasn't. Makes our perspective a little more unique on things like that. We're going to be bringing those kind of the pop culture references and examples of how that aspect of world building has been tied into other media. So another thing that we're going to be doing that's going to be making this an interesting podcast, in my opinion, is as we progress, as we progress, we're both going to be building a world. a fictional world alongside it. And we're both going to be discussing elements of that fictional world. Like when we end up talking about governments, we'll talk about some aspects of fictional governments, kind of where they drew themselves, and how we're implementing governments in our world. Things like that. And at the end, it'd be nice if we could collect all that into, I guess, a file and put it up someplace with links where people could download and have a pre-built world that they could look at along with our thought processes on how we constructed it. Sort of thing. And we invite you all to do the same thing as we progress through this series. This time around, and we'd like to take looks at it from different perspectives. The same thing, different perspective. This time around, we're focusing on fantasy, I believe?
I think so.
So, there's not all that much difference between science fiction and fantasy. It's just how the magic is portrayed. Whether it's technology that creates the magic or magic that is the magic. I believe it was Clark who said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So, there's that front. Let's see. Anything you really want to lay out at the beginning here, Fuzz?
Yes. During this creation process, I am going to be winging it as an experiment. Partially because we kind of need that distinction between what to do and what not to do. So I am going to be winging it little by little as we go, partially so that the mistakes will come through and some of the ugliness that, if you don't plan a little bit, can show through.
Okay. I've got a rough idea of kind of this world that I'm planning. Fuzz, like you said, you're taking this more winging it. Both of us are going to be critiquing each other's world as we build it, and throwing ideas and things out that might help. If you have any comments to add on any of these ideas, you can go ahead and add those as the podcast continues. And like I said, if you're creating a world, let's hear about it. Go ahead and leave comments about that as well. We might read those off during the comments and questions section at the end of the podcasts. So, I believe we've hit the majority of the points for this episode 0, as it were. Let's see. Yeah. Our next planned episode will re-hit some of the points that we talked in this, like what genre we're going with, and some of the things that the genre entails, where the line differentiation is. There's not a real good one, because I've always said Star Wars is just space wizards with laser swords. I mean, you have a big furry yeti running around with a crossbow that shoots lasers. So, Star Wars is fantasy. Yeah. But our next one that we're going to be talking about is kind of an outline, getting an idea of the scope of where you want your story to take place in. Because you kind of need to know the scale of your story to know how much world building you need to put in. So, with that, we're going to end this proto-episode here. If you have any questions on scope, things like that, we may end up answering them during the podcast, but if you're just curious about it, go ahead, leave a comment below on this one. We'll answer it in the next one. And we'll see how it all shakes out. Thank you all for joining us, and I think our plan is to do this roughly every 2 weeks or so. So, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Got anything to say to them as we're leaving, Fuzz?
I do.
Okay.
Two apologies and a suggestion.
All right.
Apology 1, I have cats. You're going to hear them in the background. Apology 2, as much as I try to be, I am not professional, and yeah, sorry about that. Suggestion.
Yes.
Whilst we are building these worlds together on in the backgrounds and bringing them up during the podcast, could we, as an experiment, as maybe the front end or back end of the podcast, as a experiment, build a third world together?
Ooh, that could be fun.
Yeah.
Let's see how it goes. Let's give it a shot. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We'll see how it goes. So, with that, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Good night, everybody.
On that bombshell, good night.